Hi people, and hello my Chili Carnage crew, Chili here from Live Listen Erased. And as you are aware, Smashing Pumpkins Autumn Act 3 is finally out, which means all three are out there for us to listen to. Now I've had the chance to go back and listen to this album in its entirety, and that has been a long album, by the way. Clocks in at over 2 hours long for those who are unaware, and it's given me time to really think about this as a whole project. And well, I'm going to produce some very unpopular opinions, but hopefully I can explain myself in enough a way that you can understand where I'm coming from. You know, I am a fan of Smashing Pumpkins. I have been for 20 odd years. But this album, this whole concept, I guess, it just really sucks. And to me, this album failed. It really did. There are some cool parts to the albums. They're split up as individuals. They're interesting enough. But when we boil this album down as the entirety that it is, because that's what it is, like Autumn is Act 3. Autumn is 3 acts, I should say. It's 3 albums, not just the 3 separate releases. This is a very flawed product that Billy has sent to us. Billy, I shouldn't say, William has sent to us, because he wants to be called William nowadays. So let's really get into this, because I've had to write up a couple of pages here of the issues that I've had with the album, and let's begin with the first point that I wanted to talk about, which is the concept. You know, when it comes to like the concept, what do you, I guess, define as a concept album? Because this is defined as a concept album. You know, concept albums, they're very raw around, like it's hard to be specific, I guess you could say. You know, some people might say a concept album is this, some people might say a concept album is that. There's really no defined answer to that question. What do I think is a concept album, though? And that is what I'm basing all of these thoughts on, is what matters, I guess. To me, a concept album, it is basically like making a movie. You know, you need a good story and one that you can understand. It needs a protagonist, and it needs to be like clearly explained. You know, there's like, here is a story of someone or something that's happening throughout the entire piece. All the music relates to this entire theme throughout its run, and it just loops all the way back to it. It's really like a movie, like Lord of the Rings, for example. You know, here is Frodo. He's discovered the ring, and then he goes on these adventures, and then eventually throws it into the bloody ring of Mount Doom or something. You know, there is 3 acts, pure and simple, and very much mirrors that in Autumn. But it gets a bit more complicated than that. So, like I was saying, yes, it needs a good story, one that we can understand. You know, we need a protagonist, one that we can get behind. We need to have a clear explanation of the notion of what's going on within this album. And of course, it needs a payoff. It needs to have that, you know, emotional connection that we can build ourselves up on, and then eventually feel that excitement when it comes to a closure. The 3 best examples I can think of, like the 3 best concept albums ever released, are Pink Floyd's The Wall, The Who's Tommy, and Dream Theater's Metropolis Part 2 Scenes from a Memory. Now, all 3 of these albums had incredible stories to tell. All the music was just amazing and all that. There's just so much to unfold with each 3 of these albums. But to put it down simply, of course, Pink Floyd's The Wall revolves around the character Pink and him going through his rock and roll lifestyle from birth to his father's accident in World War II, where he dies, of course, and the impact that it's left on him as an adult going to become a rock star, and of course all the exploitations from there on after, until eventually he builds a wall in front of himself to disconnect from reality, and he tears down the wall eventually. You know, you jump over to The Who with Tommy, a deaf, dumb, blind kid who sure plays a mean pinball. You know, it's really one of the first concept albums I think that was really ever released, and it's just an amazing album, that one. You know, eventually, person who they thought was a deaf, dumb, blind kid, special, you know, and all that needs, was actually, there's a lot of issues that I probably can't cover on this episode, but anyway, you know, he smashes the mirror, eventually breaks from his prison, and gets out and becomes famous and all that jazz. Dream Theater's Metropolis Part 2 Scenes from a Memory is possibly one of the best concept albums ever put out there. Obviously detailing the story of someone who was put under hypnosis to go through their story of their lives from birth until the present day and reliving their horrors, of course, through traumatic periods of their life. And all of these albums, they have all these albums have all what I've mentioned before. They have their protagonist, they have a good story that we can understand, and they clearly explain the notions within, and of course have their payoffs. Every single one of those albums I've just mentioned have all of those points, And when you go through all of this, and you compare it to Autumn, it doesn't have any of this. Autumn is a flawed and convoluted album. It is just horrific compared to these three. And yeah, look, I know I'm comparing it to albums that are so impressive that they shouldn't be compared to others, but at the end of the day, this is a concept album, and like I've said before, that is my idea of what a concept is, following following this storyline. Each of those albums did so, and Autumn also does so. To varying degree, which will come up later. But it is a very flawed and convoluted process of an album. So, when you're going through it, Autumn requires a very deep understanding on its lore. And that's probably one of the biggest issues that this album has. That is the very first hurdle. If your first hurdle is understanding the lore of what's going on in the album, you're not going to understand the concept of what the fuck's going on. So it's a big issue to overcome. In order to overcome, though, you would have to listen to William's podcast. You'd have to go through his whole podcast detailing the album's background. Do you have time to sit through his episodes and his rantings while he goes over all kinds of this and that, and then eventually details what each track is? No one does. That's silly. That's absolutely beyond admission. I can't believe that it requires a podcast to explain a song. It doesn't work like that. You're supposed to tell the song. You're supposed to explain that within the song, I should say. I mean, it's overbearing and it's just too much information to be going over. You think about it as another artist, for example, because yes, I understand that you want to accompany your music with another medium, to further expand on its lore. And this has been done by other artists, but it's been handled in a much better way. For example, with Coheed and Cambria, they've written so many concept albums over their time. But on the other hand, they've also got the Armory Wars, which is a graphic novel that goes along with the albums. So the Armory Wars are actually, I think they were written and drawn by the singer or the guitarist, I forget, sorry. But anyway, the Armory Wars is a graphic novel that accompanies the story that is the music that they write. And that is a perfect way to do it, really. But the thing is, with the Coheed and Cambria's music, you don't need to read the Armory Wars to understand what's going on. They clearly explain all of this in the music that they write. They tell you about the characters, they kind of tell you what's going on. Look, they're not going to go into massive detail, obviously there's backgrounds behind that, but they will probably cover it later on. It's all very well done from an external medium point of view. If you have to listen to this podcast, that Williams released, just to get an idea on what the fuck this 3-minute song is, that is just a terrible idea. So he's not doing the external medium very well. Also, it's another thing to note that it goes with the experience, but they have written, the music to be understood, Coheed and Cambria. So they have that background knowledge, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. They've done it multiple times, and they will continue doing it, moving on into the future. If you take 2112 by Rush as a perfect example, it's a complex world and a story, all told within 20 minutes. You have the I can't think of the characters' names, but basically a world that has outlawed music, and the patriarchy or whatever it is, the society saying, "Oh, we are the rulers, we are the commanders in charge, we are those who are in charge, and you can't listen to your music," and all this is going on. It's been a while since I've listened to 2112, but there's a lot of moving gears inside 2112 that when you listen to it, you can understand what's going on, and this shouldn't be any different. Is what I'm trying to say. This shouldn't be any different, but it is. You know, these songs are all here and they're trying to tell a story similar to like 2112 is, but they don't do it well. You know, 2112 is clearly explained, the world is set, no background is needed to understand what is going on within that world or, you know, elsewise. But Autumn doesn't cover any of these aspects. It really doesn't. And that's why, as a concept album, this album really does fail, because if you need a whole dedicated wiki to tell you the story without letting the music do so, then you have failed your job even as a writer. It's a hard one to say. That is a hard pill to swallow. But it's the bitter truth. This album as a concept piece is a failure. So we move on to the next point that I've written up here, and that's the marketing behind this album. You know, the worst thing that you can do before an album is released is, I guess, compare it from your old material to your new material. You know, music critics try to avoid doing this, but it's inevitable they will. It's very difficult to do so. And the biggest issue that I think that was faced before the album was released was that Williams stated in an interview that this album was a follow-up to Machina and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Now that's a big problem, because this left it as an invitation to be compared. In fact, it had to be compared. Downright. And that's a massive blow for William to say such a thing. I mean, if there's a connection, whether it be storyline or otherwise, I wouldn't want to be making those parallels, or at least not so early on. Maybe later on, if the question was asked, you know, oh, is this a follow-up to such and such? Ah, yes it is, you are a keen listener. You know, you would want to draw that up at a later stage after the album's released, not before. And I'll tell you why. Because, for example, every time Slipknot does an album, every time that Slipknot goes to release an album, they make this mistake every time. This album is going to be heavier than Iowa. Now, I don't know if that's the writers putting in their 2 cents, asking that question every bloody time, or whether the band just seems to say it every time as a joke or whatever. But it just seems to say that every time that a new Slipknot album has been made, they seem to say that same line every time. It's going to be heavier than Iowa. You know, the last album was, the album before that was, Point 5 was, you get the idea. But the thing is, Slipknot are never going to be as heavy as they were in Iowa. They were all like on the edge of being massive junkies, fighting with each other, you know, high on drugs the whole time, and it was a complete mess. Iowa it's insane that they actually managed to record that album. You know, and you're never going to capture that, and you never want to try and capture that again. So to get all that anger and all that in the album, obviously that sound at the time, that's a whole different field. So was Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. It's a different time in William Corgan's life. You know, at that time he was going over, I guess, his rock and roll lifestyle. He was being revered by the public, and after the success of Siamese Dream, this was just going to be another time that Billy was going to go through, and here we go. We've got to follow it up with an insanely good album. How are you going to top Siamese Dream? And, there's a lot of moving gears that went into Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. So when you say that you want it to be the follow-up to an album that is often regarded amongst the fans as the best one recorded, that is like setting up your album that's just going to be setting up to be doomed to fail right from the start. It's terrible. You know, it's got to be living up to the dizzy nostalgia hype of Melancholy in your mind. If it's not as good, it's just not going to be. It's it's just this tall order. It's got to be up here. Anything less, and it's just a horrendous album. So the marketing behind that, yeah, it was just, I don't know. It was a terrible line for William to say during an interview, and I think they kind of caught him off guard on that part. As for releasing the album in 3 parts, I don't think that was a bad idea. I didn't mind that, especially given the way it was presented. So no, I think that's fine. That's actually a good point for the album. The only thing I might say is that with the album being released, in 3 parts, obviously for the 3 acts, the only issue I had was the fact that it was over 6 months. So it's too long to wait. They probably could have done it 6 weeks between each album. I know that's not a lot to digest, but to be honest, it really is, though. It's 11 tracks each album, so 6 weeks each album, still building the hype and just putting it out there. Even 8 weeks, even 2 months. But, 3 months from first to second to third album, that's a long time to wait. And the hype, it died down. It really did. If the album was enthralling and the viewers were lapping it up, then yeah, 6 months might have been that good idea. The gap between the albums at 3 months apiece, I should say. But it wasn't. It wasn't the case. This is an album, from what I understand, hackers actually took advantage of the deadline that they were giving themselves of the 3-month gap between albums. And they threatened to release the new album prior to its date. William had to pay them out, but the damage was done before this even was released. Many joke that even if it was dropped earlier than intended, they wouldn't listen to it still. So, that's terrible to hear from your fan base, that that kind of line of, oh, well, the new album might be released earlier, but I don't care. That's just horrendous. If you lose all your hype, that's it. It's game over. There's just no need for the listeners to just come back and listen to this. So, yeah, the marketing behind it was horrendous. Also, another thing to take away, I guess, is the album cover. It's very generic, very forgettable. I mean, look at this thing. Looks like a bloody ink splatter of some kind of, what is this? Blue and black, and I don't know. It looks like some first grade. Looks like something I wrote or I did in MS Paint or something. I'm going to do a gradient now. Hopefully, that's $1 million. Thank you very much. Why? Why is this an album cover? It looks terrible. I mean, again, to compare to Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, that is a cover art. That one you can picture in your mind instantly. But Autumn? It looks like 2 pieces of ink just dropped onto a watermark and just ran into each other. It's like, yep, that's what we're going to take a photo of. And that's the album cover, thank you very much. So yeah, marketing fail, complete fail. So let's talk about the music on these albums. So this is where I guess it gets subjective, because you all have made up your own mind in regards to this album. From a lot of feedback that I've got on the videos I've made, by the way, I've got 3 reviews out there, 1 for each act, but a lot of the opinions have come back to me and said, I do not like this album because of XYZ. Yes, that is a pun. Now, the main thing here is that obviously I've got my thoughts in regards to that, but this is as a whole now we're talking about. And now that I've had a lot of time, I guess, to think about it, I look back at, say, the very first track, or second track, I should say, on Act 1. You go to Butterfly Suite, and you go over reading the lyrics, for example, and, to hold you from afar, to sing out butterfly, arms froth, but Mars besides, for dancers, rent with pride, yada, 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 go to the chorus, it's morning to good morning to you, son, don't ever set our love, cause our love has just begun, yada, 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 again. Then you read up about it, and it's saying, every day while in space, June sings this love song to Shiny, even though they don't know each other, and the relationship that June has with Shiny is only on her mind. How am I supposed to know this? Because none of it is in the opening track. I don't think any section of this album mentioned June. And I guess you'd have to go back to the other albums to know so, but how the hell am I supposed to know this is meant to be an opening love track to these people? It doesn't mention it. I'm sure someone's going to bring me up about it later on, but that's just an example. You follow on to the next track. Okay, let's go to the next track, for example, on Autumn Act 1. The Good in Goodbye. And you go on to say, you look through all the lyrics and all this stuff. To dank doom, to dank fire, into the black and hard, anointed ones, provided sons, etc., etc., etc. Again, and then shine, we are shine, as we all shine, yada yada yada. Shiny has decided to send a code called the March of Life to his ship. This code will send his ship into the sun and kill him. Again, how am I supposed to know that this is supposed to be a code and it will send his ship into the sun and kill him? I don't know if this is someone just ranting on and whatever, or having a troll or something, but this is just annoying. If it's true, if indeed it is true that this song is meant as a code, then how the fuck am I supposed to know? Anyway, I'm not going to listen to his podcast just to figure this out. It should be in the lyrics of the song, and that's where I think it just fails a lot of the time. As for the music itself, well, it follows on from like the styles that were heard on Sear and the previous releases, and I just don't like that, but whatever, you know. I've got to say though, when I was listening to this album as a whole, just early today, it does kind of work. Yeah, it somehow, for some reason, it does kind of work. And there may be a chance that this could be a sleeper album, and years later we could be going, oh my gosh, this is like a clarity moment from Jimmy Eat World. You know, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near that kind of memorable, but there might be the chance that this is going to be a sleeper album, and years later people will then realise the genius on it. But I don't see that really happening. They might grow a little bit, but you know, it just doesn't seem to work to me. The other thing as well is that it's a 2-hour runtime. It's 2 hours, 20 minutes nearly? 2 hours, something like that. It's a lot of time to listen to music, and who has that kind of time when they're listening to music? You know, I might get 40 minutes at best. Imagine going to a gym. I'm going to do a 2-hour gym session to Smashing Pumpkins Autumn. It doesn't work. It just does not work. I mean, and that's not even including Shiny and Oh So Bright and Sear and Machinima or anything like that, which is technically part of this universe. That would be like 4 hours of material right there. So disregarding that, this is a very long album, over 2 hours, and it just is. It feels uninspired, boring, lackluster, all these other words that I can think of. You know, it's just too dull. It's like dull as dishwasher. I think I commented on I think I commented on Chill Dude on the Couch's video when he was talking about Autumn. By the way, check out his channel. Really good bloke. But I think I commented on his video describing it as dull as dishwater, and I think that's what I can describe this as. It's, you know, it's a long album. It's too boring. And it's too similar, with not a lot of noteworthy songs, even in the sections that are interesting. You know, the best one, obviously, Beguiled, out of 33 tracks. Beguiled. That's the only one I can remember. That's saying something. Maybe Sojourner or whatever. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Sojourner. That is another track that I really did enjoy. I think is a pretty good track. A lot of people don't seem to think the same thing, but I liked it. You know, but outside of that, out of 33 tracks, there's probably, 4 or 5 I can really remember. And that's a bit of a problem. Especially the other aspect I didn't really care for is it being a concept album. I don't care that this is a concept album. I don't give a shit about the concept. I don't understand it. I don't want to. And I don't care to go in depth and find out about the information. I just don't have any apathy towards this. I mean, when you're boiling it down, the hero from, this whole, I guess the central character for this is Zero. And this is a concept album on that character, Zero. Now, keep in mind, Zero is... keep in mind, this whole concept album, I should add, is based off one song from Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. And... again, actually, that's actually 3 or 4 or 5 albums now based on one song, Zero, from Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, which is really odd. I mean, I know in all fairness, the song Zero was addressing Williams' issues at the time, and I go into depth about it a bit later on, but it's just, it's a lot to consider when you dumb it down like that. One song spawned 3 or 4 albums. Wow. So, yeah, it's just too much to consider all that. And at the end of the day, I don't consider William a writer of concept albums, and he isn't really known, for me anyway, to do so, unlike Dream Theater and Pink Floyd, who built their careers on doing so. So, you can argue Machinima was, it's a concept album. Again, I'd argue that with a loose narrative. And people might say, yeah, Melancholy is a concept album. It is not. It's a collection of songs that fit a narrative. And that does not make it a concept album, I mentioned that earlier. So just because, obviously for me, a concept album is something that is a clear and concise storyline. Just because a bunch of songs fit the narrative of it doesn't make it a concept album. So, my definition, you could say otherwise, but I think you're wrong, So, no, I don't consider Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness to be a concept album at all. It is a loose collection of songs that just fit very narrowing, concepts. Sorry, very narrowing themes, I should say. I mean, if you really want to argue that point, then keep in mind this. If you want to have that, a bunch of songs that fit a theme on a narrative on an album, you would have to include other albums into the mix as concept albums, like Alice in Chains' Dirt, which is mostly about heroin use and all the rest. Slayer's Rain in Hell, which seems to be repetitive war and torture constantly throughout the album. Metallica's Master of Puppets, because obviously war and violence and everything else around it. Every single Sabaton album they ever release. And then by the same logic, the following albums could also be by the same logic, the following albums would also be considered concept albums. LMFAO, Sorry for Party Rocking. Sorry, I fucked that up. LMFAO, Sorry for Party Rocking, because it's talking about partying all the time. Limp Bizkit and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, because it talks about partying and sex and all that shit. You could also probably extend it to Cardi B, Invasion of Privacy, because she talks about sex a lot or something. I don't know. Never really listened to it. Or you could also go to Gene Simmons' solo album, Arsehole, because it's self-explanatory. So, by that, loose collection, if anyone says, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, that's a concept album because it all fits a narrative, you're wrong. Because every single one of those albums I just mentioned would be concept albums. You can't argue that point. That's just how it is. So yeah, for me, a concept album is something that is a storyline. All the songs just fit along that storyline and describe what moves forward in this story. So that's just for me. Anyway, I think the biggest anchor though, when it comes to comparing like this, I think the biggest anchor I should say was its comparison to Melancholy. It really stopped this album in its tracks. And I mean, at the end of the day, the music from Autumn is nothing like that album. And obviously when he made that point back in the marketing one, talking about this is going to be the follow-on to Melancholy, and the Infinite Sadness, you really fucked up. You really did fuck up in that regard. So, I'm not expecting like another Melancholy, but still, when it was marketed as such, it was a really bad move. I mean, at least when Melancholy did its things in variations, it was interesting. Unlike this one, there's just not much variation. It's either hard rock in sections, or it's just electronic synth rock, barely rock in that regards, and it just never seems to fit in between. It's one or the other, and they just made it very uninteresting on both aspects. The last one I want to talk about is the ego of this album. Obviously, we're talking about William Corgan here, so this is probably going to get fairly bitter. But this is perhaps the most prominent flaw when you are looking into the album, okay? Obviously, there is William's ego to fit into this. And he wants to write a concept album. Therefore, we are writing not just one, not two, but 3 concept albums. So, yes, we have a whole interest, we have a band full of very talented musicians focusing entirely on an effort that just will not pay off. I originally had 3 points when I was going to do this episode, but when I was really, listening to it and reading up some things, I thought, you know what, this should be a 4th point for this. So, anyway, let's go into it a bit more. But the story is about Zero, which I've mentioned before, which is William's alter ego that he created around about the time of Siamese Dream. Everyone started to see him as a rock god, and he didn't like the idea of himself like being a rock god. He saw himself as a zero, a nobody, plus also makes for a cool shirt. So, hence why he wrote that song Zero that was on Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and also his music around about that time being, a lot of disconnection and alienation, which is the themes that are within that album, and also he reflected it musically on there, and he did it well. So for him to come into this album with a rather inflated ego on himself, and write 4 more albums as well on this concept, from Machinima to Shiny and Oh So Bright, Sear, and now Autumn in 3 separate sections, it's probably saying something about him. It's not saying anything good, but if you wrote music that was reflective of your emotions at the time of disconnection, alienation, around about melancholy, what type of music are you writing and reflecting around yourself when you are the inflated ego? It's kind of like that scene out of bloody what's that? Not the Avengers film, Ego, the Planet. I can just imagine seeing William Corgan's face instead of the freaking planet in the name of that movie that I just can't remember. Marvel Cinematic Universe. Somebody comment below. I've had a complete mental blank. This episode has taken longer to record than I thought. But still, people, you know what I'm saying? Like, his ego is inflated to such a point. So that's just a lot of albums to write about your alter ego when you don't want to be the focus of attention. I just think that's saying something about him. I think somewhere along the lines he blurred, he really blurred that line of being a alter ego, and unfortunately it is reflected upon his music ability. So yeah, I don't know what to say about it. The new album talks about Zero being a hero, but no one noticing or not caring in the album. Whether this has anything to do with his real life or not, that's open to interpretation. But also, does it reflect his connections with Alan Jones? Who knows? I didn't even know about that thing until one of my viewers pointed it out to me, and I'm like, well, that just shatters a reality I had about someone. Still, I'm listening to the music aspect only. I'm not going to factor in that. But anyway, it's a lot of time and effort to really be going on about the alter ego. And a police car is probably flying past, and you might be able to hear it in the background. Now, I do think that William sees himself as a rock god. He always has seen himself as a rock god, despite the fact that he really didn't want to see himself as that. And that's because, it's like he has a really bad connection with his audience, I think. It can be seen in various interactions with fans from time to time in videos you might see from people. On top of that, he's been, in the videos he's rude or short with them and giving snarky responses. And there's one thing to be snarky and funny, but it's like he's just been snarky and rude, and it just kind of gives me the shits. Like, I was watching this video the other day, and someone's called out to him, why didn't you play 1979? And he's like, because people like you asked for it. And you can tell in the tone and inflection and the way that he said it back to him, it's like, dude, it's your biggest song. It's up to you if you want to play it, but that fan is going to walk away from meeting you for the 10 seconds that he probably could in his life and be extremely bitter and show resentment towards you now. So, you might be that famous person that's out there and obviously being the face of Smashing Pumpkins, but you got to be showing your game face to all your fans, because they're the ones who have supported you and made your career. It sucks to see it like this, but I do remember in an interview he gave around about the time that I saw him live during the Oceania tour, and he said, it's my job to rock you guys, and I don't care after my job is done on stage. And it's like, oh well, that's a bit disheartening, And from what I have heard, it seems to be the case for, he is regarded as one of the biggest assholes in music industry. Kind of like Van Morrison. He just doesn't give a shit. So it's a bit disheartening, I guess, to hear that type of stuff. He writes some good tunes, or has written some good tunes. It's been a long time, guys. But for the fans that are, lucky to see him, it'll only be so for a moment. Put your game face on, do a smile, whatever the shit, You may think and hate about it all you want, but dude, you're a rock star. Don't act like an asshole and get it confused for being a rock star. So yeah, if you want to act like an asshole to them, it will crush them and force them to really not listen to your music. I guarantee that guy I was just talking about in the video probably hasn't picked up a Smashing Pumpkins record since that came out. And if you burn enough bridges, it can really leave you in a bad place. So, from what I can see here when I'm going over the play counts on Spotify, this album isn't doing so well on the third act. You know, it's been a week, and if you exclude the singles Spellbinding or Fireflies, it's pulled in like 21,000 views per song. That's 3,000 plays a day, which is horrendous to think about. You know, this is a band that have sold platinum records in their past. Millions of people have listened to their music and know of their music. And to say that in 1 week, only 3,000 views a day? That's fucking terrible. I don't know what to say, people. Again, it's just going to be that's going to be my catchphrase for this episode. I don't know what to say. But I do think that people don't care enough, and they are exhausted with this direction that Billy Williams made in this. So I guess the fans might have been split with Sear or Shiny, but with Autumn, it's just pushed them to their limits, and they just don't care now about the final aspects of what this album has become. If I was to really rate this album as a whole, so we're now talking about all 3 acts and ranking all 3 in its entirety, I would rate it at 2.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, which is a very low score. You know, if you want to know about how I rate my spicy scale, go watch the short video I've made, and it's out now. But, you know, 2.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, which is interesting because separated, the albums did quite well. I think, I remember the Act 3 got 6.5 million. You know, Act 2, I think it got around about the same score. Act 1 didn't do very well. It was a pretty shit-house album. But when you mix all 3 of these together, it just... no, it doesn't work for me. I think it's just got too much filler. The great songs aren't even that great. And the runtime really wears me down. You know, I guess at the end of it though, I will cull this album down to 10 or 11 tracks on a Spotify list, and I'll include it in my favorite. You know, I'll just include my favorite tracks on that one. And people will say, yeah, it ruins the concept, but fuck the concept for this album. It's a failed concept album, this guy. Everyone, Autumn is a failed concept album, just saying. It will now be called, the playlist will be called Autumn by Chili. If you want to follow it, it'll be on Spotify. Link will be below as well. Now, what about the future for the band? What's going to happen with Smashing Pumpkins moving forward? You know, I've heard rumours that their new direction will be in a heavier way, and I really do hope so. You know, hopefully it's something like along the lines of Zeitgeist, but even if it was still slightly electronic like Oceania, I wouldn't complain, because both of those albums I feel are very underappreciated. You know, both those albums kick ass. And it sucks because, you know, Zeitgeist, I don't think it's ever been available on any streaming platforms like Spotify or Apple Music or anything like that. And I'm pretty sure only recently Oceania actually got taken down. So both of those albums are not available to listen to. You can probably listen to Zeitgeist online somewhere that I wouldn't know where, YouTube. But, you know, it's a really cool album. I've got the CD somewhere actually still. I should have got it out for the recording of this, but anyway, here we are. But, you know, the fact that it could be heavier and hopefully they make a return like Zeitgeist did would be a very interesting aspect. You know, mad shout out again to Hector from Chill Dude on the Couch. You know, I know he loves Zeitgeist and probably loves it as much as I do. So, yeah, look, I want to hear your thoughts, people. What did you think of this album as a whole? If you stayed around for this whole episode, thank you. But tell me, what are your thoughts on this album as a whole? Did you want to? What direction do you want to see the band take in the future? Do you want to see it go in a more Zeitgeist direction or Oceania direction? Poll below. But yeah, I would hopefully see them going in that Oceania direction, I'd say. I think that one was better than Zeitgeist. Yeah, so thank you very much for checking out this episode. It's been a long one from Live Listen Race. It's a really long review on Autumn. Then again, it's nothing compared to the album. Still but a puddle compared to the ocean that is involved with that. So thank you very much. Make sure to do the socials, like this video, share it with all your friends. Comment below, share the shit out of it, do all those things, man. But as always, people, you have a great day. Stay spicy. Can't even see it. There we are. Do it on this side, that'll be better. Stay spicy, people. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Live Listen Erased. And if you have enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with all your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our Chili Con Carnage crew so you can get notified for all the future videos that we put out, as we put out videos every Friday. Also, we are on Discord, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter over at Live Listen Erased, so make sure to tune in over there. And don't forget to like this video so that our manager can stay very happy.